Look at her. Thinks she's too good to even sit with the rest of us. The voice, sharp and laced with the cheap bravado of a boy trying to sound like a man, cut through the dull roar of the mess hall at Naval Station Great Lakes. The crowd, a sea of navy blue uniforms and freshly buzzed heads, rippled with the comment. A few nervous chuckles broke out, the sound of complicity from those too timid to disagree and too eager to belong. Most just kept their heads down, shoveling lukewarm chili into their mouths, pretending not to hear, pretending not to see the lone figure at a small table near the back wall. She offered no reaction, not a flicker of an eye, not a tightening of the jaw. Her focus remained entirely on the thick, dog-eared technical manual open before her, its pages filled with complex schematics and dense blocks of text. She turned a page, the crisp sound of paper a tiny island of purpose in an ocean of noise. Her movements were economical, her posture relaxed yet aligned, a study in quiet efficiency that went completely unnoticed by the young men who had made her their target. But from across the cavernous room, behind the billowing steam of the main serving line, an old Master Chief Petty officer squinted, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He had served for 32 years, from the humid jungles of the Philippines to the frozen decks of carriers in the North Atlantic, and his eyes were trained to see things others missed. He didn't see alone, aloof sailor ignoring a group of loud-mouthed recruits. He saw a coiled spring. He saw a posture that wasn't just relaxed, but ready. He saw a stillness that wasn't passive, but predatory. He saw the way her gaze, though fixed on the book, seemed to register everything in her periphery. He had seen that exact same profound calm before, in other places in other people. It was the calm of those who had walked through fire and found it merely warm. It was the unmistakable signature of competence, so absolute it required no announcement. If you believe respect is earned in the crucible of action, not demanded by the volume of one's voice, type earned in the comments below. The initial volley of insults, having failed to provoke a response, only served to embolden the ringleader. His name was Miller, a recruit barely 3 weeks into his training, yet he carried himself with the unearned swagger of a fleet admiral. To him, her silence was not strength, it was weakness. It was fear. It was an invitation to escalate. He pushed his chair back with a loud scrape, the sound of deliberate challenge. His 3 friends, a chorus of identical haircuts and nervous energy, followed his lead. They rose as one and began the slow, deliberate walk across the linoleum floor. Their boots echoed with a false authority as they moved between the long rows of tables, a 4-man pack closing in on their chosen prey. The ambient noise of the mess hall began to subside, forks and knives pausing mid-air as hundreds of eyes turned to watch the impending drama. The recruits formed a semicircle around her small table, their bodies blocking the fluorescent light from above, casting long, menacing shadows over her and the pages of her book. Miller leaned forward, planting his hands on the table, his face uncomfortably close to hers. His voice was a low, condescending drawl designed for maximum public humiliation. What's that you're reading there? Some heavy stuff. He tapped a finger on a complex diagram of a ship's turbine engine. Planning on fixing a nuclear submarine all by yourself, princess? His cronies snickered on cue, their laughter sounding thin and hollow in the suddenly quiet room. She finished reading the paragraph, her eyes moving left to right with unhurried precision. Only then did she slowly, methodically, place a thin metal bookmark to hold her place before closing the heavy manual with a soft thud. She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw her eyes. They were not angry. They were not fearful. They were calm, analytical, and utterly unreadable, like the surface of a deep, cold lake. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady, carrying no more inflection than a weather report. "Excuse me, you're in my light." The sheer, unadorned simplicity of the statement stunned him. He had expected a snappy retort, a plea, a flash of anger, or the satisfying glint of tears. He had received a polite, factual dismissal. It was as if a gnat had complained to a mountain that it was blocking the sun. It was so outside his script of intimidation that his brain momentarily short-circuited. His face flushed a deep, blotchy red. Humiliation turned to rage. His hand shot out, not to strike her, but to commit a deeper violation. He reached for her book. "Maybe I want to have a little read." From across the room, Master Chief Thorn began to move. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply started walking, his gait measured and deliberate, a landmass in motion. The few senior enlisted personnel who noticed his movement immediately understood. They put their forks down. They watched him. They knew that whatever was about to happen, it was already over. The moment Miller's fingertips brushed against the worn cover of the Navy Technical Manual, a line was crossed. It was not a line of etiquette or decorum. It was a line of professional sanctity. The book represented knowledge, duty, a responsibility she was there to fulfill. His casual, arrogant attempt to take it was an assault not on her person, but on her purpose. And in that infinitesimal fraction of a second, the woman at the table ceased to be a passive observer and became an active agent. The shift was imperceptible to the untrained eye. There was no sudden tensing of muscles, no widening of the eyes, no intake of breath. Instead, there was an absolute cessation of all superfluous motion. A profound stillness descended upon her, a state of such perfect equilibrium that it seemed to suck the very energy out of the air around her. For her, time dilated. The noisy, chaotic mess hall faded into a muted, gray background. The four recruits ceased to be individual boys and became a tactical problem set. She saw not faces but centers of gravity. She saw not limbs, but vectors of force and arcs of potential movement. Her mind, honed by years of training in the most unforgiving environments on Earth, was not feeling. It was processing. It was calculating angles, predicting trajectories, and identifying vulnerabilities with the cold, detached speed of a supercomputer. Miller's grab was clumsy, telegraphed by a slight lean and a tensing of his right shoulder. As his fingers closed on the book, her left hand, which had been resting on the table, moved. It was not a strike. It was not a block. It was a fluid, almost gentle interception. Her fingers, with the precision of a surgeon, found a bundle of nerves and tendons on the inside of his wrist. She didn't squeeze or twist. She simply applied a small, targeted amount of pressure and used his own forward momentum against him, redirecting it in a smooth, circular motion. A jolt of sharp, electric pain shot up Miller's arm. His fingers uncurled involuntarily. The look on his face was not one of pain, but of pure, unadulterated shock. His own body had betrayed him. The recruit to his right, seeing his leader falter, reacted impulsively. He lunged forward, reaching to grab her shoulder in a brutish attempt to restrain her. But he was reaching for a ghost. She was already in motion, pivoting on the ball of her right foot. The metal leg of her chair scraped a short, sharp line on the linoleum floor, the only sound in the dead quiet that had now fully consumed the room. She wasn't just moving away from the attack. She was moving into it, closing the distance on her own terms. The pivot was a masterpiece of economy. It brought her inside the second recruit's clumsy, outstretched arm, placing her in a position of tactical dominance. As his hand grasped at empty air, her right elbow continued the arc of her rotation, rising to meet the side of his neck just below the ear. It wasn't a powerful blow. It was a perfectly placed tap against the vagus nerve. His lights flickered. His vision swam. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and his arm, the one he had reached with, went suddenly and terrifyingly numb. He stumbled backward, his legs turning to rubber, his face a mask of bewildered panic as he clutched at a limb that no longer felt like his own. The third recruit, positioned to her left, was slightly more cunning. He saw the first two attempts fail and adjusted his plan. Instead of a grab or a strike, he went for a full body hold, aiming to use his superior size and weight to envelop and crush her. He lunged his arms wide, intending to wrap her up in a bear hug. It was a classic bully's tactic, relying on brute force over technique. But he was trying to catch water in a net. As his arms began to close, she didn't resist or push back. She dropped. Her center of gravity plummeted as she bent her knees, her entire body flowing downward and forward, underneath his desperate grasp. Her movement was liquid, a seamless transition from vertical to horizontal and back again, a principle of yielding to and redirecting force that was alien to his world of pure aggression. As she moved under his arms, she placed a hand on the back of his knee and pushed. Combined with his own forward momentum, it was all that was needed. He was hopelessly unbalanced. He pitched forward, a falling tree, his arms flailing as he crashed directly into the fourth recruit, who had been cautiously circling around behind her. The two of them went down in a tangled, clumsy heap of limbs and surprised grunts. The entire sequence had taken less than 10 seconds. Now, only Miller remained. He had recovered from the initial shock to his wrist and was now incandescent with a mixture of fury and public shame. He let out an inarticulate roar and charged, all technique abandoned in favor of blind rage. She met his charge not with force, but with physics. As he closed the distance, she took a single, small step to the side. Her right foot swept out in a low, clean arc connecting with his leading ankle. It was a simple, elegant, almost lazy-looking motion. To the onlookers, it seemed impossible that such a small movement could have such a devastating effect. Miller's legs were taken out from under him, as if by an invisible wire. He fell, and he fell hard. The air was driven from his lungs in a pained whoosh as his back slammed against the unyielding floor. Before he could even process what had happened, she had stepped forward. She placed her foot, gently, on the center of his chest. It was not a stomp. It was not an act of aggression. It was a statement. A quiet, undeniable declaration of absolute control. The entire mess hall held its breath. The silence was deafening, a physical pressure in the air. She looked down at the gasping, defeated boy on the floor. Her voice, still perfectly calm, cut through the silence. The book is Navy property. You will not touch it. She removed her foot, stepped back, and pulled her chair back to the table. The demonstration was over. Into this tableau of stunned silence and absolute defeat, a new presence made itself known. A long, sharp shadow fell across the sprawling form of Recruit Miller, a shadow that seemed to carry with it the weight of decades of authority. Master Chief Petty Officer Thorne had arrived. He stood over the scene, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture as rigid and unyielding as the keel of a battleship. The sheer gravity of his presence was overwhelming. The recruits still on their feet, the two who had collided and the one nursing his numb arm, snapped to a semblance of attention, their faces pale with a new and more profound kind of fear. The two on the floor scrambled to their feet, their movements clumsy and desperate, brushing themselves off as if they could wipe away their humiliation. Thorne's gaze, however, was not on them. It swept over their terrified faces with dismissive indifference. His focus was entirely on the woman who now stood calmly by her table. He didn't see a junior sailor who had just been in a brawl. He saw the aftermath of a controlled, professional action. He saw the way she had already returned to a state of complete composure, her breathing even, her stance relaxed. He saw the economy of motion, the utter lack of wasted energy, the precise and final way she had de-escalated a situation that four larger men had initiated. He had seen that same disciplined efficiency in the deserts of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan. It was the hallmark of a specific, elite tribe. His voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was a low, rumbling command that resonated through the cavernous space, demanding and receiving immediate obedience. "Everyone," he said, addressing the hundreds of gawking sailors, "back to your meals. The training demonstration is over." The words hung in the air, electric with meaning. Demonstration. He had not called it a fight. He had not called it an incident. He had framed it as a lesson, and in doing so, he had already passed judgment. The spell was broken. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd as sailors turned back to their trays, pretending to eat, though their ears were still straining to hear. Thorne then turned his attention to the four recruits. His eyes, which had been observational, now turned to chips of ice. His voice dropped even lower, becoming a quiet, menacing rasp that was more terrifying than any yell. "You four, with me." Now, they flinched as if struck. Without a word, they fell into a clumsy line behind him, their heads bowed in shame. Before he turned to lead them away, Thorne looked back at the woman. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of respect from one seasoned professional to another. The formality in his voice was a shockwave that rolled through the nearby tables. "Petty officer," he said, the title sharp and clear. "My apologies for the interruption to your study time." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned on his heel and marched toward his office, his 4 shamed charges trailing in his wake like prisoners being led to the gallows. The Master Chief's office was a small, sterile space, smelling faintly of floor polish and strong coffee. It was a room built for delivering life-altering news, both good and bad. For the 4 recruits standing rigidly at attention before his large wooden desk, it felt like a tomb. Miller, his face still blotchy with a cocktail of shame and terror, stared at a fixed point on the wall behind Thorne's head, trying to control his trembling. Master Chief Thorne sat down heavily in his chair, the leather groaning in protest. For a full 2 minutes, he did nothing. He didn't speak. He didn't look at them. He simply stared at the polished surface of his desk, letting the silence grow, letting it press down on them, letting them stew in the acidic juices of their own colossal mistake. The quiet was a form of torture, far more effective than any shouting could ever be. Finally, he looked up, his gaze moving slowly from one pale face to the next, dissecting them, weighing them, and finding them wanting. His voice was dangerously soft. "Do you have any idea," he began, pausing to let the weight of the question sink in, "who you just tried to assault in my mess hall?" Miller, desperate to regain some microscopic shred of dignity, to frame his actions as a misunderstanding rather than an act of supreme idiocy, found his voice. It came out as a weak, cracking stammer. "Master Chief, she's just a sailor. A seaman, maybe. We were just messing around. We didn't mean any." Thorne cut him off. Not with a word, but with a look of such profound, weary disappointment that it struck Miller silent more effectively than any blow. The Master Chief turned to the computer terminal on the corner of his desk. The silence in the room was now punctuated by the sharp, rhythmic clicks of a keyboard as he typed. Each click was like a nail being hammered into the coffins of their nascent naval careers. He navigated through a secure portal, entered a series of passwords, and a file appeared on the screen. He swiveled the monitor to face the 4 recruits. "Look," he commanded. The screen glowed with the stark, black-and-white data of AU's Navy service record. The name at the top read, Rostova, MY. Rank, Petty Officer First Class. It was the information below that made the blood drain from their faces and their stomachs clench into tight, painful knots. The narrator's voice could have listed the credentials, a staccato litany of excellence that stood in brutal contrast to their own foolishness. Unit classification, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Status, Active Operator, Tier 1. Primary Specialties, Close Quarters Combat, Instructor Grade. Advanced Demolitions, Covert Entry, Hostage Rescue. Combat Deploiement, Set Classified. Awards and decorations. Silver Star, Bronze Star with V for Valor, Purple Heart, X2, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. The list went on, a cascading scroll of heroism and sacrifice. Thorne let them read it, let the reality of it wash over them. Then he spoke, his voice the final, damning verdict. Petty Officer Rostova is not just a sailor, she is a guest at this command, on temporary assignment from DevGru to rewrite the close quarters damage control curriculum. She is a warrior who has survived situations you boys can't even imagine in your worst nightmares. She is a subject matter expert in the very violence you so stupidly and arrogantly tried to visit upon her. She is a United States Navy SEAL. The last 4 words landed with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of Miller's lungs. The world tilted on its axis. Arrogance, pride, anger, it all evaporated, replaced by a cold, bottomless abyss of shame. They hadn't just picked a fight. They had tried to mug a thunderstorm. The story did not just spread, it detonated. It escaped the confines of Master Chief Thorne's office and raced through the veins of the base with the speed of an electrical current. The first carrier of the tale was Thorne's own yeoman, a young petty officer 3rd class who had caught a glimpse of the 4 recruits' ashen faces as they stumbled out of the office. He saw their 1,000-yard stares, the hollowed-out look of men who had just gazed into the abyss and seen their own insignificance staring back. He mentioned it to his friend in the barracks, who worked in the supply depot. The supply clerk, while loading a truck with provisions for the base galley, told one of the culinary specialists. That culinary specialist, while serving evening chow, whispered it to a bosun's mate. By the time the sun had set over the cold waters of Lake Michigan, the story had become a living entity, a piece of communal folklore growing and morphing with each retelling. The initial facts were embellished into legend. The 4 recruits became 10 Marines. The mess hall became the deck of a hostile warship. The clean, precise takedowns became a whirlwind of broken bones and shattered teeth. By morning muster the next day, the myth was that she had done it all blindfolded, with one hand tied behind her back, while simultaneously translating a Russian submarine manual. But the truth, as it often is, was far more potent and instructive than any of the fictions it spawned. The legend wasn't about brute force. It was about its absolute absence. It was about a level of skill so profound it appeared effortless. It was a story of competence, not chaos, of precision, not punishment. The focus of the real story, as it was quietly corrected and disseminated by the senior enlisted who knew better, was on her stillness, her control, her utter refusal to meet ignorance with anger. The 4 recruits, meanwhile, faced their judgment. There was no formal captain's mast, no court-martial. Master Chief Thorne was far too wise for such a blunt instrument. Their failure was one of character, and so their punishment would be an education in humility. He assigned them to 1 full week of extra duty, from 0500 to 2200, reporting to the chief culinary specialist. Their job, to clean the very mess hall they had disgraced. They scrubbed floors, scoured grease traps, and polished steel serving lines until their hands were raw and their backs ached. Miller, in particular, was given the task of mopping and buffing the exact patch of linoleum where he had been so effortlessly laid low. Every day, he saw her. Petty Officer Rostova would come in for her meals at the same time, sit at the same table, and read her same technical manual, utterly oblivious to the storm of rumor and awe that now swirled around her. She never once looked at them. She never gloated. Her indifference was a far more powerful indictment than any words of condemnation could ever be. A new dynamic settled over the base. The other recruits, now fully aware of who she was, gave her a wide berth. But it was a different kind of distance now. It was not the shunning of an outsider, but the respectful space afforded to royalty. They would nod as they passed, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and reverence. They called her petty officer with a gravity usually reserved for admirals. They left her in peace, understanding at last that her solitude was not a sign of arrogance, but a requirement of her profession. She, in turn, remained a constant. The whispers, the stares, the myths, they were all just irrelevant noise, a distraction from the task at hand. She had a curriculum to write. She had a job to do. The opinions of children were not her concern. For recruit Miller, the week of punitive cleaning was a crucible. The physical labor was grueling, but it was nothing compared to the mental flagellation he endured. Every pass of the mop over the spot where he had fallen was a fresh reminder of his own staggering arrogance. He wasn't just embarrassed. His entire worldview had been shattered. He had built his identity on a foundation of cheap confidence and physical intimidation. And in 45 seconds, a woman half his size had demolished that foundation and shown him it was made of sand. At night, sleep offered no escape. He would lie in his rack, staring into the darkness, replaying the encounter in his mind, over and over. But as the days passed, the memory began to shift. The sting of humiliation started to fade, replaced by something else, a deep and unsettling sense of awe. He stopped focusing on his own defeat and started analyzing her actions. He remembered the impossible fluidity of her movements, the way she had seemed to flow around their clumsy attacks like water around rocks. He remembered the precision of her hands, the perfect application of leverage, the absolute absence of a single wasted motion. He realized, with a dawning and profound clarity, that he hadn't just been beaten in a fight. He had witnessed a masterwork. He had been given a brief, violent glimpse into a world of human potential he never knew existed. The experience ignited a spark of desperate curiosity. He wanted to understand. He started spending his few precious hours of free time in the base library, a place he had previously scorned. He didn't look for a file. He knew he would never find it. Instead, he checked out books on kinesiology, on the principles of leverage and momentum, on the philosophies of martial arts. He read about the mindset of the warrior, the concepts of Mushin, or no mind, the state of calm clarity she had so perfectly embodied. He was no longer trying to soothe his ego. He was trying to learn. The climax of his transformation came on the final evening of his punishment duty. As he was leaving the mess hall, exhausted and sore, he saw her walking out of the base library, her technical manual tucked under her arm. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to avoid another moment of humiliation. But another, newer instinct, a fledgling sense of honor, pushed him forward. He took a deep breath and walked toward her. He intercepted her path, stopped 5 feet away, and snapped to the most rigid and formal position of attention he could manage. Petty Officer Rostova. His voice was steady, stripped of all its former bravado. It was the voice of a man, not a boy. I am Recruit Miller. My actions in the mess hall were without honor. My disrespect was inexcusable. I offer no excuses. I sincerely apologize. He kept his eyes fixed forward, expecting to be dismissed, ignored, or verbally eviscerated. Maya stopped. She turned her head and looked at him. For the first time since he had met her, her eyes showed something other than detached analysis. It was not forgiveness. It was not pity. It was a flicker of professional assessment. The look a master craftsman gives an apprentice who has finally learned how to hold a tool correctly. She gave a single, sharp nod. Then, she did something he never expected. You telegraph your intentions, Miller, she said, her voice as crisp and technical as the diagrams in her book. You lunge from the shoulder. All your power is in your upper body, which makes you top-heavy. Your center of gravity is unstable. That's why the sweep was so easy. Fix that. And with that, she turned and walked away into the evening twilight, leaving him standing alone on the pavement, utterly stunned. It was not absolution. It was not a lecture on respect. It was a technical debrief. It was a correction. It was the single greatest gift she could have possibly given him, a piece of professional advice. The lesson was finally, painfully clear. True competence doesn't hold grudges. It doesn't waste energy on emotion. It identifies a problem, and it corrects it. Weeks turned into months. Petty Officer First Class Maya Rostova completed her temporary assignment, submitted her revised curriculum, a document that would go on to save countless lives in damaged, smoke-filled ship corridors, and departed from Naval Station Great Lakes as quietly as she had arrived. There was no farewell ceremony, no plaque, no public acknowledgement of her time there. She was a ghost, a whisper, leaving behind nothing but the faintest ripples on the surface of the base's daily life. And yet, she was not gone. Her legacy remained, not in bronze or paper, but etched into the culture of the institution itself. The small, unassuming table in the corner of the mess hall became an unofficial landmark. New classes of recruits, upon arrival, were quietly told the story by their senior enlisted leaders. It was no longer a piece of gossip, but a core part of the base's informal curriculum. The table became known, simply, as the Rostova table. Sitting there was an unwritten privilege, reserved for those who understood the lesson it represented. The story became a parable, a cautionary tale passed down from one generation of sailors to the next. Don't judge a sailor by their size, their gender, or how quietly they eat their lunch. Judge them by their competence. And if you can't see their competence, assume it is of a level you cannot yet comprehend. Master Chief Thorne, a weaver of institutional character, incorporated the incident into his leadership development briefs for newly pinned chief petty officers. He never used her name or her unit, respecting the silent code of her community. He simply told the story of the quiet professional and the 4 arrogant recruits. The moral was always the same. Your job as a leader is to see past the surface, to look for the quiet ones, the ones who don't broadcast their skills. They are your foundation. Your job is to recognize true worth in whatever vessel it appears, because that worth, not the noise that surrounds it, is what will win the fight. The most powerful testament to her legacy, however, was Seaman Miller. He graduated from boot camp, no longer at the top of his class in bravado, but at the top in discipline and focus. He arrived at his first command, a destroyer deployed to the Pacific, a changed man. The loud, arrogant boy was gone, replaced by a quiet, observant sailor who listened more than he spoke. He became known for his unwavering work ethic, for being the first to volunteer for the grimiest, most difficult jobs, and the last to complain. He moved with a new economy of motion, his center of gravity seemingly lower, more stable. One evening, in a ship's mess, he saw a scene unfold that was a pale echo of his own past. A few of his shipmates, puffed up with confidence after a few months at sea, were cornering a new sailor, a young man fresh from A school, mocking him for being too studious, for spending his off hours reading manuals instead of playing cards. The old Miller would have laughed along, or perhaps ignored it. The new Miller acted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a threat. He simply walked over, stood between the bullies and their target, and said, "Leave him be." His voice was low and calm, but it carried a strange new weight, an authority that had been forged in shame and reforged in humility. The other sailors, surprised by his quiet, unshakable confidence, looked at him, then at each other, and simply backed away. Miller had become the living embodiment of the lesson. He was the ripple effect of that single 45-second encounter. True legacy isn't a name carved in stone or a story told in a bar. It is a lesson learned so deeply that it alters the character of another. It is not what you leave behind. It is what you push forward. Maya Rostova left no monument at Great Lakes. She left behind a better sailor. The archetype of the quiet professional is the silent spine of every elite organization on the planet. They're the ones who anchor the team, the steady, immovable points around which chaos swirls and breaks. They do not seek the spotlight. They're the source of the light itself, illuminating the path forward not with words, but with the undeniable brilliance of their actions. Maya Rostova's story, played out on the humble stage of a training base mess hall, is not exclusively a military one. It is a universal principle, a truth that echoes in every field of human endeavor where true mastery exists. She is the unassuming ER nurse who, with a quiet word and a steady hand, brings calm to a trauma bay descending into panic. She is the senior software engineer who, after weeks of others' failed attempts, silently finds and fixes the single line of buggy code that was threatening to crash an entire system. Her only comment a simple resolved in the project log. She is the grizzled aircraft mechanic who listens to $1 million jet engine, her eyes closed, and diagnoses a microscopic fracture in a turbine blade not by reading a sensor, but by hearing a flaw in its song. It is the silence that testifies to their skill. It is the silence that proves their confidence. It is the silence that endures, a solid foundation of accomplishment, long after the hollow noise of arrogance and boasting has faded into forgotten air. The symbols of that day at Great Lakes became a lexicon of character. The technical manual, a symbol not just of knowledge, but of the ceaseless, humble pursuit of it. The clean, effortless takedowns, a symbol of precision, of using the absolute minimum force necessary to achieve the desired effect, the very definition of professionalism. Recruit Miller's quiet, direct apology, a symbol of humility, the understanding that true strength begins with the admission of weakness. And Master Chief Thorne's respectful nod, a symbol of validation, the wisdom of leadership that recognizes excellence without needing it to be announced. These are the pillars of a code that is written not in regulations, but in action. They walk among us, these quiet professionals, hidden in plain sight. Their resumes are not printed on paper, but are written in the scars they carry and the lives they have saved. Their accolades are not the polished medals pinned to their chests, but the success of the missions they enabled and the competence of the people they mentored. They do not require your applause. They do not need your recognition. They only need the task, the problem, the mission. And when they are called to act, they reshape their small corner of the world, not with a self-aggrandizing roar, but with the profound, undeniable, and silent gravity of their competence. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent discipline defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.